It makes it sound so serious, that intro, doesn't it? But this show is far from serious tonight. This is the last edition of Smoke Your Mirrors Forever. It's going to be full of favourites tonight, so stick around and make sure you send some text messages. 0400 03 1067, the last episode of Smoke Your Mirrors with CC Disco.
Yeah, and absolutely, I love the community. We're all here to support, and you know, it's not competition. There's room for everyone, and that's something that's absolutely positive.
It is interesting like that because, you know, we've got a lot going on.
Absolutely. I mean, you can go out any night of the week here and have a great time.
$20 ago, we'd come out of a club like the Lounge, 5, 6 a.m. and the streets of Melbourne CBD, it was like a ghost town. And I remember I'd say to myself, this is like so freaking depressing. Where are the people? This is a city. Now, there's, you know, I'm still coming out of the club at 5 a.m. Maybe not as often, but no, and now it's a very different story. That is just quite incredible, you know.
I mean, I remember a time not that long ago where, you know, we used to fantasize about these scenes in like Berlin and London and all these crazy cities that have these crazy parties. I guess that was a time where, to pursue a career, I felt that I had to leave Melbourne and go to Europe and put myself where the action was. And it's been funny and really great to see over the years the whole situation flip to a point now where it's almost like the supply can't keep up with the demand. There are so many new punters and so many events and festivals, and the situation is quite remarkable.
They're like great time. They're like, what the hell? Like every weekend there's something amazing on. Yep.
Like them coming to this today after Something Unlimited and our launch and last night. They must be like, wow, do you guys ever stop?
I have quite a connection to this space because I grew up across the river, the Yarra River. It's like the main river artery of Melbourne. And just down there is the Fairfield Boathouse. Families will come and get rowboats and eat scones and have weddings. This crew called Volley Spot actually have activated the space and worked with the council to get permits to run dance events. We're right in the middle of the parkland and it's really quite a beautiful space, so there is a lot of red tape in just making sure that the space is taken care of. Aside from that, fitting into the cultural arts program of the council, I think like they're all very encouraging of events down here. It used to be that there was maybe 2 months of dance parties a year, and now they're opening it up and doing some more live stuff. We have a really amazing, not very intrusive security company that hold the space in such a way that you don't need to have big walls or temporary fencing, so it does feel quite open. Did you hear about the party in Sydney a few weeks ago? There was like only like 200 people there. They shut it down with a helicopter. Like, for like 200 people.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Those guys have like put so much work into running that space, and they do it so ethically. You feel it immediately when you get there, the whole vibe of that space. Safety is number one to them, and community is number one to them. This is like a legal park party essentially, and being able to operate a party in a park with a big sound system and have all the safety protocols in place, that's a very lucky thing to do.
We've worked with a lot of different councils across Victoria, and generally speaking, they've been nothing but supportive. We get a lot of help from the council. They've got years of precedent which has been set by a number of other music festivals here over the last 20 years, that they use that knowledge to help guide us through certain situations rather than say, well, you can't do this because X amount of years ago this festival screwed that up.
A few years ago, the Brumby government, a Labor government, tried to bring in the lockup laws because there was a couple of violence issues in the city. The city mobilised, and the arts and culture and the music scene all got together and marched and made it an issue that the government at the time had to take notice of.
Now, I just want to see a show of hands. Who here has been out for a drink after 2 o'clock in Melbourne? And how many of you violently assaulted someone while you were out having that drink? I think, John Bromby, you might be under a bit of a misapprehension about why people are out after 2 o'clock. They're probably out because they're out seeing one of the international acts or DJs that might not come on till 1 or 2 o'clock that you can only get in a fixed state. They might be out because they've had a good night out and they want to move to somewhere quieter, one of the fantastic small bars and clubs that Melbourne is renowned for and that other cities around the world are trying to emulate.
The Melbourne general public have a really massive social conscience, so if something happens and it's not right, then people will protest about it straight away. In Sydney, people were a bit lacklustre in reacting to the problem. Now look at where it's gone to there, it's crazy.
Melbourne internally had 120,000 plus people migrate from other cities in Australia last year. So Melbourne's growing at a pretty alarming rate, and a lot of cultural refugees from Sydney, and Sydney now just loses them all, really.
I mean, it's almost been a race over the border from people from Sydney to set up shop here. You know, it's amazing to have talented people here and to connect with them and to see them do their thing, but part of me feels a little sad they're not still on the ground and fighting the good fight in Sydney and making that happen. I mean, I don't blame them. I gave up and I moved down here as well. You can move down here and potentially pay 40% less on everything. Rent's cheaper, groceries are cheaper, taxis are cheaper. Just the whole lifestyle is cheaper. Sydney is cripplingly expensive. There's a lot of money there, but not for people like us.
In Melbourne, I think you can see the people from Sydney. Like, there's loads of them that have moved down and then they dance early. And you're like, yes. And you go and like high five and everyone's happy on the floor at dance floor and you're like, ah, you're from Sydney too. It's like this gratitude. We're just like, yes, we made the right decision.
I feel like one of the downfalls of Australia is that we haven't really had that history of like culture, you know, and we haven't existed for as long.
Australia, as such a recent colonial project, doesn't really have its own cultural identity. The cultural identity of Australia, of white Australia, is sausages on the barbecue and Australian flags and celebrating Invasion Day. And there aren't old creative bases to draw from.
People do attempt to look back into the amazing, like, rich Indigenous history of music and art and culture here, but so much of that has been lost or is hard to access.
Maybe not having that history, people don't have that sense of pride that can conjure up, you know, the relative emotions to want to create something and want to express yourselves.
The cultural cringe in Australia, which was in the 80s and 90s, where Australians really didn't think they were good enough. And when international acts were touring here, we always felt like we were second rate. But I think recently, in the past few years, the artists are actually looking back inside our own country and finding something inspirational there rather than finding something from another culture. Australians are finally proud of their heritage, and that's why the music does have something different, because of our isolation and because we're now looking at ourselves.
The reason we started Analogue was just to put out our own music and the music of our mates and the wider community. We love the idea of being Australian and a Melbourne offering, and I'd say Melburnians are just as excited about music that comes from Australia as music that comes from overseas.
There's a lot of people trying to push new and exciting things, at the same time helping each other to make those things possible and collaborate. And a big part of what we do is trying to keep things happening here and present them to the world as well.
We're in the cold room at the meat market, what was the meat market in Melbourne, which was given as a space for them to run a not-for-profit synth studio. A lot of the gear has come from private collection or from university electronic music departments. So like that Surge was originally at La Trobe Uni, as a lot of this equipment was, which was one of the first places in Australia to have like a university electronic music department. I'd never actually come down to MES, and they were using grants and government funding to enable people to get access to the space that hadn't been here before. So they had a professional development course that ran for 12 weeks with a group of musicians, and one of those spots was kindly given to me. So I got to come and learn basically from scratch again, which strangely enough was something that you never really do as an electronic musician. Just having the capacity to like mess with some pretty like odd waveforms is kind of cool. The climate of arts funding is relatively healthy in Melbourne, and there are spaces available where people can do stuff like this. Realistically speaking, you don't really have access to this stuff, and you don't necessarily need to have access to it all the time, but it's beautiful to come and work with something that you would have pretty slim chance of owning, or even like generally encountering as like a person making dance music in Australia.
And then I'll get you to jump into
People can come here and try it out, and then they can go home and keep working on the same ideas. And if they need that little bit of psychological mania from plugging in 300 cables into a big thing on a wall that no one else in the world has, they can get that here, and then they can go home and keep working on their ideas.
this a show or?
This is a show. We're running a festival here today. It's called Something Unlimited.
A bit early?
Yeah, it starts at 12.
That's all right.
Yeah.
That's okay.
No worries.
Something Unlimited is a very special kind of Melbourne event. I think it really embodies a lot of the values that the city seems to hold. There's some international artists, there's a more guitar-based bands, and then there's electronic artists. It's a very central location. There's really interesting visuals going on. The space was so considered. One of the people that's involved in running this festival is Glenn. Glenn's involved in the Innovatica Festival and Strawberry Fields. So again, all kind of eclectic electronic dance music festivals that kind of have been known to be quite diverse in their lineups. And there's Will Evans, another person who's involved in running this.
We're going to sweep the main one. Yeah, thank you.
The Melbourne scene's kind of sort of at that stage where it's small and everyone puts their fingers in multiple pies, but the right kind of people are running this event, and they're ones that I've worked with on festivals like Strawberry Fields and Innovatica. And yeah, for me, it was just 4 of my really good friends who I also work with in the music industry are doing an event. I want to be a part of it in some capacity. So,
I know, more guest list. Guest list?
Yeah. 6 degrees of separation is 1 degree of separation here kind of thing, and everyone knows everyone. And I think it's because it's a small population, it's a big country, the scene of electronic music is relatively small, so it is a kind of big community even across cities around Australia. And I think it is that grassroots community, local driven stuff that is a big part of the scene, and then that connectedness to other cities and other crews and that sort of thing that has helped it grow and foster over years.
Very good.
What's cool and what's acceptable shifts very quickly, I think, due to the size of the scene and that everybody is involved in the same conversations. And I think that's happened in a way that's really beneficial politically as well. And that it's suddenly become unacceptable set by a small group of discourse to, book an all-male lineup.
And Brooke.
I first started clubbing here before we had conversations about intersectional feminism and gender nonconformity, and those conversations were not at all present in this community, and it became really, really pervasive when those conversations did come in, and there was a lot of really quick change.
Yeah, so
So before that, it was newscasts and people talking, having radio plays.
Yeah, well, I was driving Eris picked her up at the airport, and I was listening to Triple R, and it was an all-female and gender non-conforming choir or something, an ad came on, and she was just what the hell? That's Melbourne.
A lot of the most booked local DJs now, and a lot of the best local DJs that are getting a lot of prominence are women and other minorities. And I think a lot of these groups had to work so hard behind the scenes for so long that now that they're finally getting their due credit, they're ahead of the curve. One area where the change has been slower to happen is higher up the power chain. There's a lot of promoters in Melbourne, and there isn't that diversity in terms of promoters. Same to a greater extent with venue owners. So I think there's a lot more structural work to be done.
What was on last night?
Man, we had a punk gig on last night.
Sick.
It was fucking sick.
Yeah.
And so it was like a sold out gig. It was massive. And those
Sick.
fucking throwing cans, crowd
surfing.
It was fucking...
This place was a punk rock place for a long time. About 4 years ago, they changed hands and we came and saw it, and it was like the perfect, most bizarre, unique place to throw a party. The biggest thing with the bookings is just booking the most diverse lineup possible. Venues like the Gasso, they actually impose rules on people throwing parties for the first time to make sure that their lineup is diverse. We sometimes squeeze in a few internationals, but really the power is in the locals anyway. A lot of the newer local DJs bring the most people down and they create this amazing vibe.
It's great that, touring musicians come and perform in our city, and that's also a really healthy part of the scene. But I think, like any place, you've got to look after the locals as well, and you've got to make sure there's spots for people to come and play.
If you don't have like these international acts coming in as much, then people who are local have more of a chance to thrive, and they have a stage. They can develop a following and create like a celebrity and a community around their art and their performance.
So many of Australia's best musical exports have come out of Melbourne, and the bar's been set high from a very early point in time.
I think often a lot of international acts that come here for the first time underestimate how clued in the local crowds are, and sometimes I feel like they get outshone by the locals. I mean, often, it happens often.
They are better known by the local audience, or they can play to the local audience better. They're more versed in it. Melbourne does also have that incredibly strong live music scene, and seeing the cross-pollination between live musicians and electronic musicians, I think has allowed producers here to also be a lot more creative in what they're doing.
There's a lot of, great punk musicians that start techno projects, and, a lot of DJs that want to, get into production, and it feels like there's more of a dialogue between those worlds than sort of elsewhere.
I think it's interesting that I make weird synth music. It's ambient, sometimes it's pretty noisy, and I played with rock bands last week, but I've been invited to play a bunch of dance events.
The festival circuit has been really interested in scheduling 4 or 5 bands that are rock or an indie genre, and then into a mix of that, and then by the time we get to midnight, it's techno and it's house or it's disco. The audience wants to see that diversity reflected in lineups of genres too.
Meredith, that's a really great example of that sort of cross-pollination between those worlds, because it's this really unique space, this really unique festival that's been running for 25 years, and one stage, everybody plays to everybody. They book a lot of local acts, and particularly the DJs, you will get an opportunity at some point to play at Meredith, and that's a huge leg up and really exposes a lot of diverse music lovers to the local scene. I had sort of the benefit of releasing records on labels based in Europe, so that was really how I managed to reach people over there. Sort of releasing through Echo Vault and MCDE and these kind of quite established sort of European dance labels. As far as getting people over there, it's really difficult. I mean, touring a band of 3 people is expensive, and you really have to have enough shows to sort of make it worthwhile and run a pretty tight budget. Government funding helps, certainly, with achieving that, but it's hard to get off this rock sometimes.
It's hard to break out, like it's very easy to plateau here. It's very easy to reach a certain level and still get accolades and not really have to push yourself, I think. I find that I got too comfortable. I saw a future for myself that could have just been what I've been doing for the past couple of years. Once you become a local, it's like you play at Golden Plains or Meredith or something, and then you'll support a few internationals, and maybe you'll have a residency at a club night, or maybe not, but it's like where to from there, almost, sometimes in Melbourne, because it is so isolated.
Today I have been getting ready for my last show on PBS, which is kind of a bittersweet day, I'd say. It's been almost 6 years, and now I have to pick all the songs I really loved when playing it, which is it's like killing off some kids, picking your favourite kid and drowning the rest. I came here about 12 years ago and I knew one person, and it is really hard if you're an outsider. You have to prove yourself in this city a lot, I think. You have to understand everyone's part and everyone's place in this city and all work together. Right now I look back and I'm glad it kind of happened that way, because it's made me work really hard and just totally immersing myself in the scene, which is what you have to do here. Melbourne's been just amazing, but there's some limiting things with Australia. Like, for example, if I play in Victoria, I can't really play for another 2 months. I think last year I probably played Melbourne 5 times. If you live here, if you can only do 5 gigs a year, it can be quite limiting. Last 12 months I did 3 tours of Europe, and then I'd come home and then, these really big offers would come through and I wouldn't be able to do them. So I made the decision last year to go and give Europe a crack. I'm not 21 anymore, I know I look it, but I think the more you get older, the harder it is just to pack up and leave. You have to actually make the sacrifice to not see your family for 6 months or 8 months or a year. Get fucked, another red light. When I came here, I actually started working at PBS. In fact, I got my job after I went to the Daft Punk concert, went out all night, then went to the interview at 11 o'clock, hadn't slept, sweated everywhere, and the boss still gave me the job. How are you?
Yeah, good. How are you?
I'm good.
Oh, my God, you must be sweltering this.
Nah.
How do you feel?
Oh, I can't really think about it yet. but good, I think.
Did you prepare it?
A little bit. Hi. Once I discovered PBS and Triple R and FBI in Sydney as well, it kind of just blew my mind in terms of music community. These are all FM stations as well, so they're not just internet stations, and I think there's a totally different community when it comes to FM band. Thanks for giving me the show. They're pretty much fully funded on their own by members. PBS and Triple R would have, 30,000 members between both of them. So this is paid people who are paying for the service to listen, which is fantastic.
So when are you actually relocating?
Like the 18th or 19th.
Oh, you've got weeks.
Yeah. I got to pack up my life and stuff.
Cece's got her last show tonight, and it's a big fucking deal. It actually is. I know it's not, like BBC One or whatever, but it means a lot to a lot of people who start their weekend off with Courtney from the country going, "G'day, boys and girls," like fucking disco. It means a lot to a lot of people,
It is going to be a night of all favourites tonight. And so many text messages coming through. It's really sad to finish this up, but it is time. And again, I really do want to thank all the members of this show. It was quite astonishing when I first started to think that, hundreds of people have signed up. One person's paid $1,500 to be a member of this show after he saw me at Meredith. It was very true when I say this. It was really hard to get DJ bookings before I got this show, so I really am indebted to PBS forever.
I was on the tram and they were like, "What are you doing tonight?" And I was like, "I'm gonna go say goodbye to CC Disco." And they were like, "Can you say goodbye from us?" Just random.
Really sad that she won't be here because of her presence on the radio, but also because she's a really good friend of mine, and she's really supportive of me behind the scenes, and she's really supportive of a lot of people in the scene in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Adelaide, whatever. Everyone at PBS is going to miss you. Everyone in Melbourne's going to miss you. I'm going to miss you. Everyone's going to miss you, and everyone in Melbourne and the Australian music scene owes you a very, very big debt of gratitude. And I will now very, very briefly speak on behalf of everyone and say thank you, Mazel Tov. Congratulations, Auguri, we wish you the best, and thank you for being the best. And that's all I wanted to say.
I'm so happy there's a film crew in here right now so I don't cry.
I've never met anyone that doesn't like Cece, so it's we're sending one of our best soldiers into the European DJ war, and we're all pretty proud and confident. But at the same time, it's I wanted to stay and be supportive of everyone here, but bittersweet is my answer.
Sorry, that was so abrupt.
It's fast and it's aggressive.
There we go. Done.
This is always what I like in good rock and roll.
PBS. All right, fucking hell. Oh, thank you for coming in. That's really nice of you. Thank you. Cheers, cunts.
You're listening to Get Down on 3RRR.
I suppose it is, the sort of constant evolving sort of face and nature of a nightclub scene. Mm-hmm. We lost the lounge and hugs and kisses and
Mercat.
Some clubs go and some clubs are born.
Absolutely. Rest in peace, lounge, Mercat, hugs and kisses.
It was about 8 years ago, and I saw a sign outside that said licensed venue or something like that. And the old guys downstairs who run the Buffalo Club told me that they had he referred to it as the ballroom upstairs. So I remember being like, oh yeah, I really like to maybe go have a look at that. And then he kind of sauntered me upstairs and showed me around, and I guess I just straight away realized there was a huge amount of potential here, and I ended up somehow communicating this deal with them. All right, mind your step.
Surreal being here again. I worked at the door here before I even started DJing, so, just walking up these stairs and thinking about all the times that I've done that in the past 5 years, and thinking about how it's never gonna happen again.
Measure up and do a bit of a design for them.
Oh yeah, what is it going to be?
I don't know exactly yet. It's a hospitality venue of some sort.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
The feeling that you kind of got when you're in here was a huge experience of just freedom.
I remember one night, actually, we used to have these curtains that just got like ripped down, and I remember I was like showing somebody through the venue, and then like a naked ass just started like poking out of the curtain, and it was like somebody was just like getting like back to the sex club vibe, and I was just like, whoa. I was like, well, maybe we'll try the next booth.
Yeah.
We were obviously fortunate to take over this license, and the main issue with why this was important is because of the change in licensing now and the move towards the 1 a.m. freeze, which was what was enforced in inner city Melbourne and surrounding suburbs. Effectively, it was a stop on all new licenses past 1 a.m., which at the time didn't really seem that big a deal, but now the push for like development in the city continues. The effects of it are really coming into play, and a lot of venues can't afford to stay open. And then obviously, by not granting any new licenses, you're just monopolising the current licenses. Something like a 2 a.m. lockout was so immediate. It was like literally someone closing the door on your face. From a policy standpoint, it's been more devious here. Like the way that they've gone about doing this 1 a.m. freeze is something that probably had a decade-long plan to get a similar response, which is the shutdown of venues in the major part of the city.
The big three has been the Mercat Cross, which closed about 2 years ago now, and that was a real techno-basement institution. Hugs, which I think hurt the queer community the most, and Lounge is just another, another check on the list, another difficult venue to lose. They aren't issuing any new licenses, so if a venue like the Mercat closes, which has a 24-hour license, that license is dead and there's no way to get it back in the current political climate. That's one of the biggest problems. There's very few left.
Now I don't know what's going to happen as more and more venues close. There's just like no real indication that they're going to be changing the licensing laws anytime soon.
We were talking about things like Melbourne Music Week, but they might fund this big activation with a bunch of big bands, and it might look really good, but it also might finish at 1 a.m. and have some family-friendly acts on it, which is not necessarily a good articulation of electronic music. A good articulation of electronic music might be dancing until 7 a.m. and having quite a free space, and I think those sectors are not really encouraged as much as they should be.
It's nice that a lot of holistic ventures that celebrate art and concepts of culture that are a bit more palatable, are getting some leeway or like using that avenue. But a strobe light and smoke and some really high quality music in a dark club is exactly the same as a room full of installations and experimental music as well. There's absolutely no difference. It's just performance art in two different avenues.
There's some good fortune in that Angel Music Bar, which is a really small space, 80 people with an incredible sound system, and finally an owner and staff that are actually value aligned and want to put on good events. And I think that will actually become a new, very important part of the scene.
I feel like people in Melbourne are pretty open to change, and we all just kind of want to support each other and create the best environment possible to party in.
The question is, will we have another Hugs or will we have another Mercat is actually reductive. The question that needs to be asked is, will we have places to dance, places to form those communities, and to as high a standard as we expect? And the answer is yes. There is always going to be places to party to amazing music in Melbourne, whether it's a festival, a bar. We're going to have them. Everyone adapts here amazingly.
There are a lot of real legitimate issues in the scene here around, lack of diversity, at higher levels of power structures, of venue closure. But then you go to some other cities and you realize just how good we have it here.
As a place to be based as a touring musician and DJ, Melbourne would be terrible because it's miles away from the rest of the world. But as a place to make music, like as a place to live a life or be healthy or have nice relationships with people, this is a great place.